Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to a word on cybersecurity. This for the week of May 22nd, 2022. Now, for those of you who keep up with such things, you'll remember that you haven't seen me for a couple of weeks. And I want to take a moment to explain that. 2 weeks ago, I have to say, I delivered a brilliant, spectacular, possibly the best word on security that has ever been or ever will be. It was magnificent. And the system, the hardware, software, streaming service, all put together, refused to record it. Actually, it's not quite true. They recorded my video, but none of my audio. And so that one ended up being scrubbed from the entire stream. Now, next, we get up to last week. And last week, I wasn't here. I was off doing, some charitable work. I'm part of an organization called Maker Effects. This organization supports the various STEM organizations throughout Central Florida. And we had a chance to exhibit at a show called MegaCon. And MegaCon was last week. And it was a lot of fun. We had a great time. We got to tell a lot of people about what we were doing and got to meet a lot of really interesting people. So I am pleased that we were able to do that and look forward to that bearing fruit from being able to get things into the hands of young people all over Central Florida in the very near future. Now, I am looking over to the side here because I am a little bit concerned about my sound again today. So we're going to make sure, he said, that we are getting sound. Everything looks like we're getting sound, so we're going to pretend that everything is working just as it should. Okay, do have confirmation on that. So, whether you're here live or you are here via recorded episode, thank you for taking a few minutes to be with me. This is live every Friday afternoon, barring the occasional issue. And it's also available in 3 different ways on a recorded version. First, here on LinkedIn, it's always available right after the show concludes. I also have my own YouTube channel, and there's an Omdia CyberSecurity YouTube channel. Hope that you'll pick up on at least one of those. Have some more things we'll be talking about at the end of the show, but let's get into this week in cybersecurity. Now, the good news is that there was no massive outbreak of attacks, no massive vulnerability that was uncovered, nothing of that sort. So from that perspective, we're in good shape. Just the sort of normal run-of-the-mill cybersecurity issues that we've learned to appreciate as part of the landscape. But there was some news, and we're going to talk about that because it leads to my word for this week. I thought about, what do we do about a word when there's no single incident that says, here is what defines the week. My word this week is three. Three, specifically as in third-party vulnerability, third-party attack, third-party supply chain vulnerability. What does this mean, supply chain vulnerability? Well, a supply chain vulnerability is one that hits your organization because of a vulnerability that one of your suppliers has. We've seen a number of these. The most significant recent vulnerability like this was one of two things: either SolarWinds, which was a software, an application, if you will, vulnerability. And then there's the Log4j vulnerability, which was more of a library, a component vulnerability. These are both important because in essentially no organization today are you going to write all of your code from scratch yourself. You're going to get applications, you're going to get functions, you're going to get various services from third parties. And if you do develop your own applications, the odds approach a certainty that you're going to get certain bits of that code, whether it's a library or a function, an SDK, something from a third party. Why is this true? Why not just put your developers to work developing everything you'll need? Well, the word that you're looking for to define that is speed. You know, we're now working at digital speed. There are consultants out there who have used phrases like digitalization to talk about turning all business processes digital. And once you turn the process digital, you start to become, well, subject to the time frame of digital. Here, let me show you how old I am. I can remember when I first got into business, we were very impressed because there was a relatively new service out there, something called Federal Express, which meant that for things like contracts and other critical business documents, you could get it from your office in Boston to a supplier or customer's office in Los Angeles the next day. Then they could do something with it, sign it, amend it, get it back to you the day after. So 48 hours, you could have a complete transaction done. Around the same time, another technology started to become more prevalent. That technology was fax or facsimile machine. Now, at the time, facsimile machines were still expensive, both to purchase the technology and to use them. Because, and this is something that a lot of people born in the last 30 years or so have trouble imagining, a long distance telephone call, that was a telephone call to anything outside of your local, often exchange, but certainly your area code, was quite expensive compared to the call within your local area. And when I say expensive, I mean that these calls could be several dollars at a time when those several dollars would also buy you a decent meal out. So they were expensive. And for long documents, it could be very expensive. So most of the time, for most business processes, you accepted that there was mail time involved. So for a contract signing, for example, that had to take place in a couple of places, you could easily be talking a week or so just to deal with the transit time of the documents. Well, the first thing that happened was that the telephone calls, long distance calls, became much cheaper. Companies like MCI and Sprint came in and made them much cheaper, even though they were a little more complicated. So that made fax machines a much more realistic thing to use, although faxes were really good at document review, and you could fax over a sign sheet to show intent, although the actual legally binding signature page still had to wait for either Federal Express or the mails to move it. As the fax machine and Federal Express became more economical, the assumptions about business speed changed. And suddenly next day was more realistic than 48 hours or several business days. Later on in that decade, email became something that was usable between different systems. I mean, email existed even before I got into the business, but it tended to be limited to one particular ecosystem. So the idea that you could be on one system, in today's terms, Gmail, and send an email message to someone, say, on Outlook.com, wasn't a possibility. That didn't happen for some time when they put into place email gateways between the two different systems and the multiple systems. After that, the internet started to be used, and that really upped the email game when it was decided that the internet could be used to carry commercial traffic, as much email was. That horizon for time was getting shorter. Then in the early 90s, browsers came along. And let's remember that the World Wide Web was designed to allow people to look at scientific and academic documents. So document review got faster and faster. And then the whole .com thing started. It snowballs, and we're getting faster and faster and faster. And the assumptions about how rapid a response would be kept going down. We then got into the 2000s, and all of a sudden, it was assumed that there would be very rapid response. I mean, I can remember years ago, I was on the East Coast. I had colleagues on the West Coast, and we would be flipping emails back and forth with the expectation of a very rapid response at midnight my time. Now, fortunately, we've gotten a little bit of the idea of work-life balance back, so that's no longer quite the thing, but we now assume that business processes are occurring faster and faster. And then came things like Agile. And Agile not as a broad descriptor, but as a discipline. And DevOps. Now, DevOps is important because all of a sudden everything is being treated as software. And if everything's treated as software and everything's doing the Agile methodology, then everything is happening on a very rapid basis. The whole idea of fail faster. Let's put something out, get feedback, fix it, put it out again. Faster and faster and faster. And in order to do that, it's simply impossible for dev teams to write every line of code from scratch. They have to go out to often open source projects where someone, and let me say now, typically very good developers, have already written the code to display something, to gather a piece of data from a particular API, to do a particular bit of processing. Whatever the small thing is, someone has developed code to do it. So why not use that already developed bit of code to go ahead and develop your application? Then comes the cloud. And with the cloud, we're getting services, not just code libraries from different places. If you have a service that will gather data, do a particular type of processing, do a particular type of storage, do something. And that service is either very low cost or free. Why not use it? It's fast. It's already developed. It means that we can turn our attention to another part of the application, something else that provides mission critical functionality to our organization. Now, all of this works well, but it introduces what we like to call dependencies. And here, let me say that we'll look at layers of dependency here, because on the first layer, it's the group that's providing you the software or the service directly. And if you're getting a small piece of code that was written by a group, that may be as far as it goes. You have a dependency on them. But in very many cases, the services, the software, the code libraries, the whatever that you are getting from a supplier, they have themselves used other code libraries, functions, services. And so now you have a dependency not only on your supplier, but on their supplier. This quickly becomes one of those things where, the turtle rests on the turtle, rests on the turtle, rests on the turtle, and it's turtles all the way down. But the question is, how far down do you have to worry about checking out the quality and security of the code or services? So it's a question that doesn't have a single answer, because it depends on how critical the thing that you're using is to your operation, and how many layers of dependency, how you are doing your dependency checking. What is the definition that you use of due diligence? Now, there are some products out there, some services that will help. They go through your code, they will go through your application environment and walk down these paths for you, checking out the dependencies along the way. But we know that there are limits to what they can do, because many of these libraries are changing on a regular basis. They're getting better. They're using the agile methodology themselves. So, when someone comes up and says, well, you could do this better, or we found an obscure vulnerability that you need to patch, they do fix it. But that means that you need to check your dependencies again. It can become a never-ending and never completely paid for process. And many CFOs hate never completely paid for processes. You're going to hear me talking a lot more about this, because one of the things that it deals directly in is your organization's risk posture. Now, risk posture is one of those things, and I'll give you fair warning, the second half of this year, I'm going to be doing a lot of research into risk assessment and management. So you'll probably be hearing words around risk on this particular LinkedIn Live on a fairly regular basis. But what's more important is being able to have some level of assurance that your supply chain is not your greatest source of vulnerability. That's tough. That's tough. We've seen things, as I said, SolarWinds was a huge problem because they were so widely used. And again, it's worth pointing out, if you haven't kept up with SolarWinds, maybe you know the word, know that it was a problem, but didn't follow it all. It wasn't an issue in any of the code that SolarWinds included directly. It was a third-party dependency that caused them the issue that caused all of their users an issue. We see this over and over and over again. Well, think back to some of the great data releases of 5 or so years ago, when we saw credit reporting bureaus give up millions upon millions upon millions of customer records to a vulnerability that, as it turned out, was in a particular version of a particular piece of code that they were using, an open source third-party code library. What are you to do? Well, the big thing is to try and have some assurance that your developers are using code from respected, from reasonable sources. If you're using third-party and especially open source code, try to make sure that it's not coming from someone where you have a single maintainer who last updated the code in 2004. Make sure that it's an active project with multiple maintainers. The next thing to do is to check your code. Now there's static analysis of code where you can walk through, and yes, walk through the code that comes from third parties, because in all of these open source cases especially, you have access not just to the functionality, but to the actual source code. Or use some of the software or one of the services that's out there and available. This is reasonable due diligence. With the speed of digital business, there's no way for you to come in and say, we will simply use no third-party services and no third-party code. No rational CIO would say that. And no honest software development manager would hear that from the CIO and say, yes, we agree, and we're absolutely never going to use any third-party code. It's just not a possibility with the way we do business today. So software supply chain is going to be an issue. So it's not an issue to be feared. It's not an issue to be ignored. It's an issue to be recognized and managed as you would any other vulnerability, as you would any other threat plane. Know that it's there, manage it, plan for it, and make sure that the dangers and risks that come from your third-party supply chain are not going to be the ones that sink your organization. Well, that's my word for this week. I do want to talk about a couple of things that are upcoming. First, in 2 weeks, I will be back here, but I will be jet lagged, having come back from the RSA conference. And I am planning to do some LinkedIn Live streams from RSA. So look for those. I'll be talking about when they're happening and where here on LinkedIn, as well as on Twitter and other social media. I'm also going to be going to a vendor conference the week following. I'll be out at the Splunk conference. Same sort of thing. I'll be back here in time to do the word on cybersecurity for that week, but I hope to be able to do at least a couple of short live streams from Las Vegas. Now, if you're interested in how to protect against supply chain issues, software supply chain in particular, and you'd like to hear more, especially on the idea of assuming that there will occasionally be a vulnerability that gets in. So what do you do once it's in your system? On June 22nd, I'm doing a webinar that covers that exact topic. I'll put a link to register, free registration, in the comments here, and you can always go to darkreading.com/Omdia to find out about that. Now, this week I have put up on Omdia.com a new data resource looking at the cybersecurity awareness training marketplace worldwide, not only the historical data about market share and total market size, but projections going out through 2026. If you're a subscriber to Omdia, you probably already have access. If not, go check it out. You can go to omdia.com and find out how to subscribe to get all the details of this research. Got a couple more pieces coming up on Dark Reading as well, including one talks about a huge change that has happened in cybersecurity awareness training in the last couple of years, specifically who is being trained. And I'll give you a little tease, might not be who you think. Well, for all of you who are here live or in a recording, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Again, you can check me out here on LinkedIn, on my YouTube channel, or on the Omdia Cyber YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter to get notifications anytime I put up a video or any other work. And please drop me a note in the comments. Let me know what you think about this and what you'd like to see me talk about. I'd love to hear your idea for the word of the week for this week and any upcoming week. Well, I'm Kurt Franklin, Senior Analyst at Omdia, saying thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.